Alright, I believe I'm recording. Welcome to a video that I'm making. And this video, we're going to jump into the work of Joseph Campbell, Creative Mythology, The Masks of God. Alright, so for any of you out there who are studying the universe, I think this video could be of some value to you. So let's dive in. So I need your help actually in this video, because the way this man communicates is frankly tripping me out. And I'm trying to make heads or tails of what the frick he's talking about. So I need your help. I need someone to listen to what I'm trying to figure out. I really hope this recording is going. I'm gonna have to start all over. But let's dive in, okay? First things first. Let's just, my goal right now is probably get to like the 4th page, maybe the 5th page. Also, big shout out to Blackie. I'll put a link to his track, but he's giving me the support, the alpha frequency that one needs to get through this kind of information. So thank you, Blackie. Thank you for being here and hearing me out and just giving me that presence, being present with me. So may have to wait a little bit because, two alphas competing with each other. All right. Track is now done. Big shout out to Blackie. Thank you, sir. Now I'm going to go and get the work done, my guy. And so, this book, man, Joseph Campbell, never met him, but he wrote another book, and he was talking about some mythological stories. And, man, those stories were deep, bro. Like, he was talking about crossing a river. I think it was a woman. I think it was some kind of woman, some kind of chica walking across some river. And it was like knee deep. The first river and the second river were like dirty, but the third river was clean. And so it was like, whoa. And it was a dream. It was some kind of dream that someone had about some kind of chica, something like this. And there was gold in the river, and she made it across. No problem. And there was like some stepping stones. So that was one story that Joseph Campbell talked about in the first chapter of his book. Like, whoa, like, hold on, guy, like, slow down. Then he talks about another story, basically the story of the princess and the frog, and how it was actually a toad, and the frog was like deep in the water and eventually surfaced. And then they started talking, and like that frog may or may not have become a man after they kissed. But like the toad was deep in that water, and it was like dark, murky, like swampy water. And then so this man be talking about, you know, his profession, right? What made him him was that term called psychoanalysis, right? You know, I'll write it down. You can look it up. We're not going to look it up together in this video. I'm going to really keep it a minimum to use technology for this sort of information. But you guys have the internet. I mean, I'm sure you guys can, you know, do the research yourself. But I'll help you in the way that I would want someone to help me in the research. I'm not going to do the work for you, but I can at least like show you the way. The only thing right now, hold on, wait a minute. You know, we got to get that paper. All right, I got paper. So let's see here. I'll keep it relatively sized, you know, but like this is the word that you can look up. You can Google it, Googly, you know, you can talk to a chatbot, you know, talk to any of the AIs if you want, you know, I'm sure they'll give you some philosophical insights, you know. If you can handle Grok, you know, talk to Grok about it, but check it out. That's the term, psychoanalysis. Now, the man who introduced me this term, the first man, was this guy, you know, some guy, you know, but his name, you know, here we go. Let's see. I mean, I'll make sure to, you know, his name is Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is his name. Technically, it's Jordan B. Peterson. Not sure what the B stands for. But Jordan B. Peterson, that's his name, okay? It'd be good to know what his middle name is, wouldn't it? But he's a Peterson. And, you know, he talked about psychoanalysis because this man is a disciple of Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, who was German. Doesn't really matter what he was, but he was German. And he was the one who coined the saying, God is dead and we killed him. That was what he coined. This man was living in the industrial period of the world, of society, which was about 100, give or take. There were several industrial revolutions, several industrial periods, but presumably Nietzsche was around like the mid-19th century. So that would be like something like 1850. If you're American, I mean, this is right before the Civil War. If you're in Latin America, there's like all kinds of, you know, things happening, events happening. Not sure what was going on out in Asia at the time, but I know that in Europe, Marxism became a thing. So the main focus was Europe because they're the ones who were going through the Industrial Revolution the most. But you also had the Ottoman Empire. You had several other groups at the time, right? But at least as far as recorded history goes, my understanding is that a lot of the focus is focused on who was doing the actual revolution or evolution, perhaps, of some kind of technological progress for humanity. And the steam engine was a big thing. But a lot of philosophy and a lot of like beliefs began to change because the nature of society was changing. And, you know, now the days of having a church were not really as common anymore. Although, I mean, obviously you still had Catholics, you know, you still had other groups, Orthodox existed, so on and so forth. But, you know, you had a new emerging sort of structure to society, and you had a new working class. That's, you know, you have a working class, you have people working in factories, you still have people working in agriculture, and along the way there's some kind of like, intellectual evolution effectively. And so this kind of like circles around to these two terms here I got for you. Psychoanalysis is the term, and then you got Jordan B. Peterson, who will explain to you a buttload about like the nature of like the Gulag Archipelago and so forth. So he talked about Nietzsche. So he studied Nietzsche, he read Nietzsche. If you can read Nietzsche, I mean, salute to you. If you have the mental cognition or the cognitive endurance to go through those works. We're going to stick to Joseph Campbell. And this man is, we'll say he's like spiritual, but I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I don't think this man is spiritual at all. I think this man is metaphysical, which is a type of philosophy. It's a branch of philosophy. And so this man is trying to give us information about the nature of not only mythology, but like mythology, mythos, right, is some kind of like the essence or the root, perhaps, of religion, right? That's what religion is about, really. If you dive deep into religion, you go into what's called theology, which again, Dr. Peterson knows a lot about theology. And you try to understand like what is sort of like the link between the ideal, the divine, and what we human beings are doing and kind of going through, and the way we think and meditate and have pensive reflections on, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that stood out to me in the beginning of this book, he says, and I'm going to quote him a lot. Let's see, make sure the copywriting here is good. We're not, I think we're all right. I think we're good. We're on good copyright territory. Not sure who, Joseph Campbell copyrighted this book, and he died. So he died in 1968. So I think we're good. But he talks about the first, like literally in the first sentence of his book, he says, the myths and rites of the primitive Oriental and early Occidental worlds could be discussed in terms of grandiose unitary stages. And I'm sitting here like, wait a minute, what does he mean by unitary stages? Unitary implies like unity, and unity implies like some kind of cohesive, either understanding, idea, belief, something where people are basically in agreement with one another, and they're saying, yeah, we agree with one another. So he's saying that the primitive Oriental and early Occidental worlds, which presumably are the societies, could be discussed in terms of grandiose unitary stages. And I mean, humanity has been around for quite a while. In fact, there's reason to believe that humanity has been around even longer than recorded history, which give or take is about 10,000 years. Göbekli Tepe is like the oldest temple that is like recorded or found by human beings, and it's about 10 to 11,000 years old. And it's like, wait a minute, that temple may have actually had a much deeper story and may have deeper origins that go even before that. I love the legend of Atlanta. Makes you wonder, like, oh my gosh, were there human beings, were there civilizations? Obviously there were Homo sapiens walking the earth, but presumably, at least the story goes, according to the anthropologists and archaeologists, they'll tell you that like, it was a hunter-gatherer stage for like 100,000 years or something like this. And we came from Africa and we were hunter-gathering. And so, that means that there were no civilizations necessarily. There were no like hierarchical, groups that were more than, say, 150 human beings, right? Hunter-gatherers were on the move constantly, right? Or had a cyclical nature to being on the move. So again, he says the primitive Oriental and early Occidental. By the way, Oriental means west, early Occidental, not late Occidental, early Occidental, suggesting that Occidental is Asia. Or did I get that mixed up? Oh, I got it mixed up. He's saying Oriental is younger than early Occidental. That doesn't make sense to me. I would think that Asia is the oldest place on Earth. I'm actually starting to believe that India, we all came from India. There's another name for it. And that the story that we came from Africa may not even be true. I'm starting to believe that the story of Adam and Eve, that story came from India, not Africa. Okay. So I would correct it here, and I would say, primitive, early Oriental, because there is like a long history to Asia, and then Occidental, right? Occidental is the West, right? So, we have the West today. We had the industrial period. Keep in mind that Joseph Campbell was living through the second industrial revolution from basically the late 19th century onto the early periods of the 20th century. So he lived through the industrial wars that predominantly Europe and the world had, the world wars. He lived through that. That was my understanding, the second industrial period, because it evolved from a steam powered coal engine to a petroleum based engine that ran on oil. And that's more or less the two stages. And so, having said that, as like, so he's saying early Occidental. So what was going on in Europe, before there were like Neanderthals, right? Or like before there were, what was going on in Europe before, Jesus Christ? We had the Greeks, we had the Romans, or rather the Romans, then the Greeks, if you're going back in time chronologically. And you go far back enough, you eventually run into the Egyptians, right? Who are essentially part of the Occidental, because they're in North Africa and they're south of Turkey and Greece, and they were close. So we're going further back than that, right? We're going to the time when, presumably, if we're talking about early Occidental, we're talking about a time before there were even Egyptians, and before there was a civilization in Europe, right? There were hunter-gatherers, presumably in Europe. I believe they were Neanderthals, right? And it's, Neanderthals were actually quite clever. They were clever human beings, or humanoids. What else to call them? And so they had art, right? The Neanderthals had art in their caves, so they were clearly working on something. And he says all of it could be discussed in grandiose unitary stages. I think the term unitary here implies that there may have been a system or a belief system in which human beings and human-like beings, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, other types of homos, they all may have actually believed in this unitary, either a unitary God or these unitary stages in which there was some kind of unity going on in their culture. There was, if not civilization, there was cultures. I mean, hunter-gatherers presumably ran into one another, and they probably had, conflicts, but they also had, I'm sure, incredible moments of exchanging either art or information, food, clothing, and so forth. So maybe there was like a cultural unity that was going on, and maybe that's what he's getting at. So if we can keep reading, for in history of our still youthful species, a profound respect for inherited forms has generally suppressed innovation. What does that mean? He says, for in history our, I'm going to read it again because, for in history our still youthful species, a profound respect for inherited forms has generally suppressed innovation. My understanding is that when he says a profound respect for inherited forms, he's speaking about spirits, effectively. Has generally suppressed innovation. So this implication, right? If you look at the implication is simply that, if you're like really focused on the spirit world, or all these spirits that the human beings and human-like beings were encountering in their journeys, that presumably, they, like, life was good. Like, you didn't have to get caught up in so much more else. You didn't have to get caught up in anything else, right? You had food, you had shelter, you understood that you weren't alone in the world. You may not have understood this notion of God, right? But you were understanding or connecting or communicating with an understanding of God's creatures, right? This includes spirit animals, for example. This includes, whatever other belief system you may want to use to explain the mythos, the creative mythos about the functioning of your consciousness and your, psychological awareness and your psycho awareness as a being, here on this earth, on this planet, and so forth. And so, yeah, so maybe like it suppressed innovation. And he's speaking, I'm assuming that this man is as a Westerner. So of course he would say suppressed innovation, because the West loves innovation. They're obsessed. They need to build more. We need rockets now. We need spaceships. We need what else? What else is there? We need another war, right? We need more tanks. We need more medicine. We need more knowledge, right? And it's all about knowledge. And it's like, where's the wisdom? Where's the wisdom? It's all about knowledge. So suppressed innovation, of course. I mean, what is an innovator? An innovator is someone who, basically can't sit still. And it's like, I got to do something with my time. And I love the stories of in America, like you go out to like West Virginia, right? You go somewhere West Virginia, and the stories of how they built water mills and like wooden housing. And, there was a battle for a hill in Georgia between the South and the North, and they had cannons, and it's like, wow, man, they were definitely innovating for sure. They had gunpowder, man, they were just blasting. They were just blasting. So, they started blasting. So basically, yeah, so it's like, yeah, of course it would suppress innovation, because it's like, bro, I mean, if the Neanderthals are like smoking something, who knows what they were eating or smoking or something, having at least a potato, presumably, they were like not so into the whole war stuff that the Homo sapiens that eventually found them were into, right? That's how the story goes. No, they were like more into some kind of other sort of experience. And so, they were like living good. Their life was simple. May not have been easier necessarily. I mean, there's still cold, illnesses, disease, right? All these other things, right? There was still like a large, big prey, right? That were out there, but like their life was relatively simple. Presumably, maybe that's why their cave art was so beautiful. If you've ever seen their cave art, it's absolutely beautiful. Oh my gosh, I wanted to make sure that I had the background here. I had a background for you all. Since I'm on the computer, we got just a gray background right now, just the gray matter, okay? And then here we got Blacky, who knows what he's up to, but, it looks like he's a knight wearing shining armor. So, I mean, he clearly knows what we're talking about. And so he, he's working on his work. He's working, he's staying busy, and, he's keeping it rated R, right? He's keeping it a buck because he knows that, like, not everybody's ready for this kind of information. So, with that, let's keep reading. He also says millennials have rolled by with only minor variations played on themes derived from God knows when. Moving on. If you can comment below and explain to me, riddle me that, please. I mean, the machine lies. If you watch this video, my guy, please help me explain what he means by that. We'll do a live stream eventually, someday, presumably. But so not so, however, in our recent West, where West capitalized, where since the middle of the 12th century, an accelerating disintegration has been undoing the formidable Orthodox tradition that came to flower in that century. Makes sense. And with its fall, the released creative powers of a great company of towering individuals have broken forth, so that not one or even two or three, but a galaxy of mythologies, as many as one might say as the multitude of its geniuses, must be taken into account in any study of the spectacle of our own Titanic age. I think he's getting at philosophy and all the different philosophies that have been born. Even in the formerly dominant but now distinctly subordinate sphere theology that has arisen since the victories of Luther, Melanchthon, and the Augsburg Conference of 1530, a manifold beyond reckoning of variant readings of the Christian revelation, while in the fields of literature, secular philosophy, and the arts, a totally new type of non-theological revelation. He's talking about Christian art of great scope, great depth, and infinite variety, and has become the actual spiritual guide and structuring force of the civilization. Okay, so for any of you postmodernists out there, okay, God is real. You don't have to believe it. In the context of traditional mythology, the symbols are presented in socially maintained rites through which the individual is required to experience. It's a journey. Or will pretend to have experienced certain insights, sentiments, and commitments. And what I am calling creative, quote unquote, creative mythology, on the other hand, this order is reversed. What is he talking about? Can anyone make sense of what he's talking about? Chat? Oh, this is a recorded video. The individual has an experience of his own of order, horror, beauty, or even the mere exhilaration, which he seeks to communicate through signs. And if his realization has been of a certain depth and import, his communication will have the value and force of living myth. For those that is to say, who receive and respond to it of themselves, will, with recognition, uncoursed. I think what he's trying to say is, like, you don't have to be conscious to understand the nature of being as a human being when you are alive, because we are all either the children or creations of God, depending on which religion you ask. Mythological symbols touch and exhilarate centers of life beyond the reach of vocabularies of reason and coercion. It's not purely intellectual, and it can never be purely intellectual, because the intellect is only one aspect of the essence of being. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy, so we're diving into it using the tools that we have, but understand that we're not going to be able to fully understand it at an intellectual thinking level, because there's other things that we can experience, starting with sensation and intuition. The light world modes of experience and thought were very late developments in the biological prehistory of a species. He talks more and more and more about a bunch of things. Moving on to the next paragraph, he says the first function of a mythology is to reconcile waking consciousness to the mysterium tremendum et fascinans of this universe as it is. The second being to render an interpretive total image of the same as known to contemporary consciousness. So he's basically suggesting mathematics, because he says function of a mythology. And a function is basically the most fundamental tool in mathematics. And then he goes on to say, the mysterious, tremendous, and fascinating of this universe as it is, not as we perhaps perceive it, because human perception is biased, and there are other people who seem to be exploring and studying the nature of our cognitive bias, at a perceptual level, a sensory level as well. In other words, the reality that we're experiencing based off of what we hear, smell, see, taste, and touch, and there are actually many more senses than that, may not even be the full nature of reality itself. We will never fully understand reality because we're human beings. We are human beings. We are not God. So, there's other, ways to experience reality, say, but, we have some kind of basic methodology, basic pool of knowledge that we use to have our understanding of the universe that's been presented before us. This is what the scientific revolution is all about. It is about expanding that pool of knowledge, that circle of knowledge. It expands. And that's how the story goes. So, it's fascinating how you've got a book like this which is part of that. It's part of that pool of knowledge. But, understand that this man's communicating in a very somewhat seemingly odd manner, right? He's saying a lot, and yet he's kind of saying nothing all at the same time, right? And this is the essence of philosophy, as I think most people would agree. You're saying all this stuff, but what does that really mean? What are you even trying to get at, right? He's trying to get at something. He's expressing, I believe, he's expressing his inner self, and he's projecting that inner self through the text of this book, through the writings and the language, the linguistic sentencing that he has provided. And as the saying goes, it's not so much about the art that the artist makes that matters. It's more about the state in which the artist is in that matters. So imagine this man sitting in probably a dark room with maybe a candle or a light bulb. He probably uses a light bulb. And he was writing this book, and he may have been just like, just typing away, or I guess he was, clicking away, this book. And it's a long book. I mean, it's not as long as the Bible, okay? The Bible is very long. But this book, I mean, it's about 600, 700 pages, okay? And keep in mind that he wrote more than one book, right? This is not the only book he wrote. So that's the thing about the West, is that you've got this plethora of books. And that's what he was saying, right? He was talking about how, let's try to find the quote again. Here's the quote. This is literally, let's see, sentence 1, 2. This is the third sentence of the book. Not so, however, in our recent West, where since the middle of the 12th century, after Jesus, an accelerating disintegration, to me that sounds like a dissolution, a dissolvement, like putting, your coffee, or rather putting your Insta coffee in water and it dissolves. An accelerating disintegration has been undoing the formidable Orthodox tradition that came to flower in that century. I would say in that millennia, not only that century, but that millennia. Orthodox goes older than just 1 century. It's much older than that. And keep in mind that the Orthodox is tied to Oriental beliefs as well. So what you have is a much deeper, much older belief system that seemed to have unified many different concepts before the time of Jesus. Keep this in mind. And with its fall, the released creative powers of a great company of towering individuals have broken forth. He's talking about a tower. Towering individuals have broken forth. A great company of towering individuals have broken forth. So that not one, or even 2, or 3, or 4, but a galaxy of mythologies, as many one might say as the multitude of its geniuses, must be taken into account in any study of the spectacle of our own Titanic age. So like the diversity of mythos is as diverse as there are stars in the universe. Or stars in a galaxy, rather. So, but a galaxy of mythologies must be taken into account in any study of the spectacle of our own Titanic age. So if you want to understand what has happened, at least in the primitive Oriental and early Occidental worlds of humanity since the time of Jesus Christ, presumably not before that, although possibly, you have to consider that there were more religions than there ever been in the history of humanity. That's what he's claiming, and I have reason to believe that may not actually be true. But whether it's before or after Jesus, the point is you had a lot of mythos going on with human beings, regardless of whether they were correct or not. right? Which is a whole nother way of discussing, that's really more of like a theological debate territory. But, I'm sure, you could have, Jordan Peterson talking to an atheist, but, and I'm sure they'll have fascinating discussions, about, I think it's Darwin, right? Who would you can have a debate about, like, whether this belief system makes sense or not. Is it true or is it untrue, and so on and so forth, right? Potato potato, okay? But yeah, so he's right. I mean, I think he's right. I would agree with what he's saying. I think maybe one implication here is that the Christian belief system is a lot more diverse. Because what is a Christian? A Christian is someone that believes in Jesus as a historical being who was alive on earth. I mean, that's all it really is. I mean, that's really, I would say that's the bottom line. Like, was Jesus real or not real? Was he here on earth or not? Or was it all simply, a conspiracy, right? And the short answer is the evidence suggests that there was a person named Jesus or Jesus or something like this who was alive in basically the modern lands that used to be the lands of Canaan and so forth. So there was a lot of groups out there back in the day, and they were fighting, they were having incest, they were doing all this stuff, but they were like, living, they were living life. And after Jesus, we know for a fact the Roman Empire collapsed. The Byzantine Empire became a thing for another 1,000 years. So whether Jesus was real or not, the Roman Empire collapsed because there was a change in belief, or as the saying goes, a change in faith. And then, I know that the story of Europe is packed full of all these different beliefs. You got polytheists. You've got what other groups are there, right? Tribes, clans, so forth. And there was still kind of like the medieval period of this, like, there was still a rumor. It may have been kind of downplayed or neglected, but like you still have this rumor in which Jesus was this person that mattered. And eventually, in time, the Catholics rose to power. And it wasn't only the Catholics, you also had the Orthodox and a few other groups. But predominantly, it was the Catholics that rose to power, and the Catholics were the ones that reinforced the idea of something. They reinforced some understanding, right? They reinforced, like Jesus died for our sins, right? That's what the Catholics are about, right? Jesus died for our sins. They then inspired people like Campbell to write these kind of books, and so you have this, like, you had counterculture, and you had the whole philosophy thing. Then you have niche, and it's like, my gosh. So I think when it comes to mythos, because there's so many different like categories to focus on, whether it's religion, whether it's groups, whether it's clans, so forth. I think a more universal way to look at it is look at the art. Forget about everything else. Focus on the art and focus on what the art is trying to say, right? And look at the art and look at the art. And the art is what gives you deeper insights. And the art of, say, the Renaissance period and other major periods of, say, Europe, but other parts of the world as well, were like fascinating. I think the only area that I would disagree with Joseph is that before the time of Jesus, the diversity in mythos was still an ongoing thing. The difference, and this is the real question, but you have religions that exist before Christianity that suggest that there was still some deep understanding of, say, a higher power. And basically, human beings have been alive and have been moving forward in, on this earth because of that, right? Because of this understanding, because of this belief, because of those ancient wisdoms and so forth, that have allowed human beings to understand there's more to what's going on than purely the material, empirical, scientific evidence, right? Or whatever came before science. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think I more or less want to wrap up the video here. This is a long book, man. It's a long freaking book, and he talks about a lot of stuff. I'm sure there's a lot to learn from this book, but I mean, I think when he says the function of mythology, I think he's implying that there is some kind of, mythological, dare I say, rational method to sort of understanding how all of these mythos tie together and are basically trying to tell us the same thing. And when I think about, like, a Dr. Seuss story or any, like, Winnie the Pooh, fiction story, you can't help but notice that these stories have deep insights about life that may be more real than real. Pluralité, So he talks about a lot, right? So cool book. Maybe I'll make another video where we can dive into this book a bit more, but I wanted to simply, establish some kind of clarity here, for my own sake, because it's fascinating, it's valuable. It has some kind of value. I'm sure it has some kind of value to somebody, certainly to me. And so anyone else who is simply curious, And so, yeah, this man did incredible work, So he wrote other books, and he, like, shares some of the stories, right? I think probably the most valuable part of this book are the stories. So here, for example, this is a story, The Wasteland, written in 1922, protests that we are all today so emptied of validity that even at the hour we are trembling with tenderness, lips that would kiss form prayers to broken stone. In the expectorate poet's memorable words, we are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw, alas. Our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass, or rats' feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed forced, gesture without motion. I had a friend of a girl who told me the best way to know if you want to finish a book is to read the last 2 pages of a book and see if that resonates with you. So we are on page 676. And I'm going to go ahead and read these last 2 parts. Join me as we read the last 2 parts of this book, and we see if this book is worth our time. So, bareheaded, cup in hand, the high brow creased with folds like some heathen idols in a shrine, and crowned by the aureole of white hair like flickering flames, there he stood by the rocks and spoke, holding the circle of thumb and forefinger, with the lance-like others above it before his face, and sealing his mute, incomprehensible toast with that compelling sign of precision. Such words as they were accustomed to hearing from him, they could read on his lips or divine from his gestures, settled and absolutely. But that was all. They saw his head sink sideways, the broken bitterness of the lips. They saw the man of sorrows in his guise. But then quiet suddenly flashed the dimple, the symbaritic ruggishness the garment snatched up with dance-wise, the ritual impropriety of the heathen priest. He lifted his beaker, waved it half-circled before the assembled guests, and drank it out in 3 gulps, so that it stood bottom upwards. Then he handed it with outstretched arms to his Malay servant, who received it with an obeisance and gave the sign to break up the feast. Once again, the words of Wittgenstein, Proposition 6.44. It is not how things are in the world that is mystical, but that it exists. Proposition 6.522. There are indeed things that cannot be put into words. They make themselves manifest. They are what is mystical. And finally, Proposition 6.4311, or rather 6.4311. If we take eternity to mean not infinite temporal duration but timelessness, then eternal life belongs to those who live in the present. C'est la personnalité qui compte. The old master sculptor Antoine Bourdelle used to say to the students in his Paris studio and in the guiding of the work, l'art fait ressortir les grandes lignes de la nature. The imagery of art, that is to say, as of myth and religious ritual, is presentational beyond meaning. Hence, of many possible meanings, simultaneously many dogmas, like more dog, on both dream and waking levels, and with effects as well in unconsciousness. During the course of the spiritual adventure inward, Heinrich Zimmer remarks in the comment on the syllabus AUM, the emphasis shifts from the outer world to the inner, and finally from the manifest to the unmanifest, and there is prodigious increase in the powers gained. Nevertheless, the inferior as well as superior states remain as constituents of the whole. Each quarter is on an equal footing, somehow with others. So too in every mythic symbol, it touches down and unites in the actuality of a person the whole range of his living present, the ultimate mystery of his being and of the spectacle of his world, the order of his instincts, of his dreams, and of his thoughts. And this today in a way of especial immediacy. For even in the sphere of waking consciousness, the fixed and the set fast, there is nothing now that endures. The known myths cannot endure. Oh my goodness. The known God cannot endure. Okay. Pause. I think he might be agnostic, which would make sense given that he's a psychoanalyst. He's a psychoanalyst. Whereas formerly, for generations, life so held to established norms that the lifetime of a deity could be reckoned in millenniums. Today, all norms are in flux, so that the individual is thrown willy-nilly back upon himself into the inward sphere of his own becoming, his forest adventurous without way or path. This is what Carl Jung speaks about when he speaks about the term individuation. I'll do you all the solid. Individuation. Check it out. There's your homework assignment. Look up Individuation by Carl Jung. There's your homework assignment, if you have the time. Into the inward sphere of his own becoming, his forest, adventurous without way or path, to come through his own integrity and experience to his own intelligible castle of the Grail. Yeah. Sounds about right. Integrity and courage and experience in love and loyalty and in act. And to this end, the guiding myths can no longer be of any ethnic norms. No sooner learned, these are outdated, out of place, washed away with time, may I add. There are today no horizons. No, of course not. I mean, look around you. There's obviously, the world is flat, obviously. No mythogenetic zones. No. Or rather, the mythogenetic zones is the individual heart. Individualism and spontaneous pluralism, the free association of men and women of like spirit, man, may I add, under protection of a secular rational state with no pretensions to divinity, are in the modern world the only honest possibilities, each the creative center of authority for himself. In Cusanus' circles, without circumference, circle singular, without circumference, whose center is everywhere, and where each is the focus of God's gaze. Who's Cusanus? Who's Cusanus? The norms of myth, understood in the way rather of the elementary ideas, then of ethnic, recognized as in the Domitilla ceiling. Domitilla ceiling, figure 1. Let's look it up. We're almost done here, but he's now pointing us to some images. Let's check that out. There might be some insight here. He's speaking about this here. Hopefully you can get a good look at that. But it says, Orpheus the Savior, Domitilla, Catacomb, Rome, 3rd century AD. So it's Rome after the Roman Empire collapsed. And it was not the Byzantine Empire, because the Byzantine Empire was Eastern Rome. Eastern Rome, not Western, former Western Rome. So, comment below, who was the society, the government, civilization, whatever, whatchamacallit, that was in control of Rome in the 3rd century AD, 300 years after Jesus. And, I mean, come on. That looks... I mean, they've got a harp. They're sitting with some horses, snake. There's a snake there. There's some dogs. Or are those... Yeah, they seem like dogs. A lot of dogs. I think I might see maybe a goat. It's hard to tell. I think it might be just like a prairie dog. There's some birds. Got some birds there. And you've got this person that looks like the god with the flying wings on their shoes. Dressed like a Greek god. With a harp. Hopefully you can see that. Hopefully that's making sense. Okay, and then there's much more going on in the picture around the edges here. This looks like kind of like a time lapse. We've got a naked man with 2 dogs, or maybe those are like lions, tiny lions. They could be hyenas for all I know. They look like tiny lions, right? And they've got like a big fur, but like they're some kind of beast. Then you've got this bull right there, chilling, with a nice trees and some bushes, like those tall kind of green bushes, those really nice. Then you've got, we're going to keep going. Then you've got someone walking into presumably some kind of temple, or it looks like they got a nice ramp. It probably is like a slow ramp. And like they're walking into this temple here. And it looks like they're pointing the way. I mean, that may be Maybe it might be like Plato when he was young, because it's clearly Greek architecture. Then, high on Hypotenuse. Then you've got another bull. This time they're like lying down. Look. That's so good. Then you got a plant, another plant, same bush. Looks like you've got some kind of white box or something just sitting in the background there. I have no idea what that could be. Then you've got over here, some dude with like just a, what's it called? It's not a nunchuck, but it's like just a wooden like bump, like that you can use to like knock someone over the head, like some cartoon character thing. So, he also got something else. It looks like he may have some bread or something in the other hand. Let's keep going. Let's make sure we don't lose the page. Then we've got definitely like some kind of goat. Could be a lamb. Either way, it's definitely like either goat or lamb. I mean, frankly, or practically, don't really know the difference. And then, they're just chilling with some trees, some plants. Might be a mountain. I've got to be a mountain goat because it looks like it's about to go up this mountain or this hill. Then you got a man like playing with like a pile of dirt. Which looks like there's a river there. Like some kind of river coming out of the rock. So water, presumably water is coming out of that either dirt or rock. I'm like being rational here. Like it's got to be dirt. And then you've got, the goat is now chilling. Now the goat is chilling. Where the bull is chilling. So yeah, like that's interesting. Definitely interesting imagery there. And then, we kind of circle back to the man with these two beasts. Naked man with two beasts, two feral looking beasts. Interesting. And, of course, you still got a snake there. Let's not forget. I think it might be a picture of a snake, not an actual snake. I think it's a drawing of a snake. And then you've got, like, cool-looking birds. I think it's a peacock. I'm seeing a peacock there. Yeah, that's a peacock. Oh, and there's a horse right there, too. That's cool. The horse looks so tired. I mean, look. It's so tired. It's a tired horse. It's so tired, so sleepy. He needs a break. The horse has been working too much. He needs to rest a little bit. Horsey need a rest. Let's continue. Let's finish. So that was figure 1 of the book. Again, check it out. I'm sure you can find this book at a bookstore near you. So that's called the Domitilla ceiling. That's what the Domitilla ceiling is all about. The dome. Idea. Through an intelligent making use not of one mythology only, but of all of the dead and set fast symbologies of the past, will enable the individual to anticipate and activate in himself the centers of his own creative imagination, out of which his own myth and life building, yes, because, may then unfold. But in the end, as in the case of Parzival, the guide within will be his own noble heart alone, and the guide without the image of beauty, the radiance of divinity that wakes in his heart armor. I don't know if they meant the heart armor or the heart amor. I'm assuming they mean armor. The deepest, inmost seed of his nature, because it's in English, the deepest, inmost seed of his nature, consubstantial with the process of the all, thus come. And in this and in this life creative adventure, the criterion of achievement will be, as in every one of the tales here reviewed, the courage to let go of the past, with its truths, its goals, its truths, its goals, its dogmas of meaning, and its gifts, to die to the world and to come birth from within. There's reference notes, and to die to the world and to come to rebirth from within. Something like this. And there's all kinds of reference notes. Enjoy the credits. Enjoy the credits. I know some of you will appreciate. Oh, let's run that track one more time.
They're not really free. They think they are.
What's binding them there?
Some of them first. They're mysterious
Would I understand it?
things. Well, it's hard to understand it though. But people run away from that because they think they're normal. But they just let another tree do its thing and just start. Go tree.
Okay. I certain.
Came from a seed. Where the people out there came from somewhere. Somewhere has a big question mark.
So you know where you're from?
Yes, from another dimension. But it is about feeling, it's not about what I know. It's about what I feel.